Good evening. I like to make presentations interactive, so please chime along as I go through. So what I'm going to talk about today is around embracing change together. We're experiencing price pressures within our industry, regulatory agencies are shifting, and we're experiencing a technology revolution. And the goal is to accelerate time to market. So this is my contact information if you want to reach me at any point in time. A little bit about Axendia, as Yash mentioned, we're an analyst firm. We focus exclusively on the life sciences industry, and we advise companies at the intersection of business, technology, and regulatory issues. We work with industry organizations, technology and service providers, as well as regulatory agencies like the FDA, advising on how can we improve. We always need to change. We always need to improve. Our lawyers ask us to put together the safe harbor statement, read it at your leisure. Basically, what I'm going to share is based on our research. So last year, we talked about where are we post-COVID. Our clients asked us, what's next? What's the new normal? And the new normal is we're continuing to live in the age of continuous disruption, right? Euryclides said 2,500 years ago, the only constant is change. What's happening is the rate of change is increasing, and the challenges that we're facing are also increasing. So we're having droughts and wildfires, we're having polar ice melts, we're having political unrest. We now have 2 wars, one in Europe, one in the Middle East. There's always going to be challenges, and you will not be able to predict the next challenge. But you have to be ready for that. And in order to be ready, you have to have the right processes and the right enabling technology to make that happen. So we need to embrace change together. No one can do it alone. No one company, no one department, no one individual, no one technology and service provider, no one regulator. We all need to work together in order to be able to transform. And just like they say, it takes a village to raise a child, it does take an ecosystem to bring a drug to market and ultimately improve patient outcomes. So as we were looking through this and thinking about it, I'm a left-handed engineer, so I think in analogies. So what's the story, right? From the moment you're born, you're a patient. In most cases, you get something done to you, even if it's taken a little bit of blood, a medical device gets used on you or on your parent. Sometimes because they faint. But something happens, right, when we're born. And as we're looking through, most companies in the life sciences industry have something in their mission, vision, credo that says the patient is in the center. Everything we do is about the patient. Ultimately, it's the patient. We want to improve patient outcomes. But the challenge is, as organizations, we're focusing on our own chevron. So I'm in quality, I'm focusing on quality. I'm in early stage development, I'm focusing on new chemical entities. I'm in regulatory, I focus on how many submissions. I'm in manufacturing, how much am I making? We're very focused on the chevrons. And instead of often rowing in the same direction, we're not. And what we need to do is align, right? We need to think about what is the ultimate goal. My goal is not that submission. My goal is not that scale up. My goal is not to get us out of that 483. My goal is to improve patient outcomes by getting that product to market, by improving quality, but my goal is improving patient outcomes. I need to have the vision long term. And how can we affect that moving forward? So the mentality needs to change, and my job, the job that I do is not my goal. Very often we're so focused on what do I need to get done? What do I need to get done? What's my job? Instead, we need to look long term. The other challenge we see as an industry is that the primary data transfer protocol is a catapult. So I have my silo with walls and a moat and alligators and sharks because I don't want, to your point, I don't want you to see my data because it's my data. I don't want you to come over here. My badge doesn't work in your department. And the problem is we throw the information over the wall. When I'm done with my job, I throw it over the wall to you, and now it's your job and your problem. And we need to stop using those catapults as that transport protocol. I'm a Trekkie. How many of you, raise your hand, how many of you don't want to admit it? So there's a story about a German and a Brazilian meeting at a Star Trek convention. And neither one of them spoke the other person's language, but they both spoke Klingon. And that's how they were able to communicate, right? We need to be able to figure out how do we talk to each other when, yes, my language is different than yours. If I'm in R&D, I'm thinking about very different things, and just the acronyms that I use mean something different than what your acronyms mean. Even if it's the same acronym, they have different meanings. So how do we communicate holistically so that we can make an impact and, again, ultimately improve patient outcomes together? We need, in Star Trek terminology, a universal translator. How do we make that happen? How do we enable communication? So Thomas Paine said, lead, follow, or get out of the way. And as an industry, that's where we are now. We need to lead, some will follow, and others will need to get out of the way. Because if you're not going to change, you're going to be going by the wayside. But there's a huge opportunity for us to do that because the business dynamics are compelling our industry to change. The technology is mature. When I started working at J&J 33 years ago, I had to convince my IT department that we needed to use this thing called the Ethernet. TCP/IP. We were a token ring shop. And I was explaining to my IT friends that the token doesn't go around the ring fast enough for me to get data from shop floor systems. Today, the technology is there. Companies like QBD Vision and others are making that happen for us. And then the regulators are encouraging us to improve. They're encouraging us to get better. They want us to bring products to market faster. But sometimes we get in our own way. What's the other compelling event? The Inflation Reduction Act in the United States of America. By January of 2026, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid will be able to negotiate prices on the top 10 drugs that it chose. 25 drugs by 2027, 40 by 2028, 60 by 2029, and 80 by 2030, and 100 drugs under negotiated prices by 2031. So if you work for one of these companies, you're the lucky winner of being one of the first drugs that CMS is going to negotiate with you. And as I talked to an industry executive, he said, when you're negotiating with a government, it's not a negotiation. They tell you what they're willing to pay. Now, according to CMS data, these drugs represented $50 billion in the last year. In 1 year, $50 billion for CMS, not for the rest of us who have private insurance. Now, in my experience, if CMS negotiates a price, my insurance company is not going to pay a penny, a fraction of a penny over what CMS pays. So this is really a compelling event for our industry. We really need to become more efficient, more effective. Profit margins are going to be challenged. And I know there are some of these companies are actually suing the federal government, and it's going to go up to the Supreme Court. But the VA can negotiate prices now. So I won't predict the future, but I have a high degree of confidence that negotiation is coming down the pike. So what do we do? And by the way, everybody has these chevrons, right? We created this about 12 years ago. Pharma created it before us, and there's different variations of these chevrons everywhere. But if you look at the product life cycle currently, and we're being generous, it takes on average 12 to 15 years to bring a drug to market. And depending on who you listen to, it takes up to $6.4 billion to bring a new drug to market. Now, granted, that includes all the failures that come along, the thousands of compounds that don't make it all the way to phase 4 and that fall early, but the cost is spent. So basically, what this means is that in 8 years as an industry, we have to recoup the cost of bringing a drug to market. Imagine, based on our research, it takes 36 to 24 months to scale up, to do that digital tech transfer process. So imagine if you were able to bring that 2 years earlier. So you spent 10 years in the R&D, you shortened a little bit the regulatory because you're able to better understand what your product does, your digital tech transfer, your scale up, all of the information that's available. You can do some in silico clinical trials. The FDA fully supports the use of modeling and simulation, and using virtual patients and synthetic arms in your clinical trials that can shorten some of that time to market. So that means you have 2 more years of patent protection. And this is not to scale, but if you look at how much money you spend gazillions of dollars you sink gazillions of dollars, $6.4 billion, in order to bring a drug to market. And the time to approval is the 12 years. Well, even if your drug were under price controls, you're going to make less money on each one, but you're going to be able to make it up on volume. And if you can start earlier than your time to approval, if you can shift 24 months, it gives you 2 more years under patent protection. So we need to start thinking differently about how we do things in our industry. And as I said, the technology is ready, but in order to succeed, we need to work together. We need to work around an ecosystem. When I worked in industry, the job of our purchasing agent was to get as low a price as possible on everything. You're buying pencils, I can get it for you cheap. You're buying computers, I can get it for you cheap. You're buying supplies, I can get it for you cheap. Buying licenses, I can get it for you cheap. Today, we're talking about a partnership with your vendors. They're your partners. You need to work with your partners, and you need to find the right partner ecosystem for you. It's not about a monolithic approach. I buy everything from one vendor. That has been tried it's going to be very challenging for any one vendor to do everything from soup to nuts. The intent is, how can you find the right partnership, the right ecosystem? And you need to align with their vision, because it's a long-term relationship. It's like a marriage. Actually, today is my 27th wedding anniversary. I've been married for 27 years. And it's a long-term relationship, and we have to compromise. But Monica bought into my vision, and I bought into her vision, right? And yes, did we have our ups and downs? Of course. 27 years together and they never had a fight? It's not real. And that's how you need to look at these partnerships with your vendors. You're not just buying a license from them, or you're not just getting a subscription. You're buying into their vision so that you can work together to improve patient outcomes. Because it is a long-term relationship. If you're just looking for cheap, then you're barking up the wrong tree. The other question we're asked all the time is, what's the best vendor? Tell me who's best at fill in the blank 3-letter acronym. And I know there are companies out there who make a very good living pigeonholing companies. Our answer is, what's the best car? Tell me, what's the best car? I can't tell you what's the best car unless I know how you're going to use it. Do you do home remodeling on weekends? Then you probably need a pickup truck. Do you have 3 kids and 2 dogs? Then probably a minivan. You have a midlife crisis? Then a sports car. Are you a college student? Then a 10-year-old Honda Civic. Right? There is no right car, but there's a right car for you. And in order to be able to understand what works for you, you need to know what your intended use is. So we're moving from point solutions to modern platforms, right? So instead of having all these standalone systems, we're bringing them together. And in fact, the cloud is enabling that to happen, because it facilitates integration across multiple systems. The protocols exist to make that happen. And you're basically hanging solutions that are the best fit for you and making a platform that enables that to happen. But in order for that to work, is all the vendors you're working with need to truly comply with standards and not just give lip service to the fact that, yes, we comply with standards. But in order to make that work, we need to write a custom interface. If you tell me you need a custom interface, then you're not compliant with the standard. And the intent is what we call digitally sustainable. The intent is to proactively seek tomorrow's technology today. And how can I use tomorrow's technology? Based on industry standards, effective and frictionless, something that leverages what we call the digital fabric, not the data fabric, and we'll talk about that. That's modern, that's configurable, that's resilient, that enables visibility across the organization. The other key point is, as an industry, we want to be perfect. Because yes, I understand from improving patient outcomes, less than perfect has risk. However, internally, when we're implementing technologies and solutions, if we wait for perfect, we'll never be done, because you asymptotically approach perfection and you'll never get there. Instead, we can use Pareto's principle and do the 80-20, right? Where can I get 80% of the value with 80% of what I need, and move forward doing that? Voltaire said, perfect is the enemy of good. And so many times, we look for perfect and we waste perfectly good things. The other key challenge that we face as an industry is the fact that we have petabytes and yottabytes of data. We don't have a shortage of data. We have data gathering digital dust or gathering physical dust in some former iron mountain. The problem is, as Commissioner Califf said, data by themselves are meaningless. Just having lots of data is not helpful. And I know a lot of people try to throw this data into a data lake, and you end up with a data swamp because you have no visibility, because you have no contextualization of that data. And he said, context, when you add critical context about what is being measured and how, then they become information. And once you have information, then you can analyze it and yield evidence. And once you have evidence, then you can guide decision making. So by themselves, data are useless. And let me give you an example. How much is $1 billion? How many zeros after $1 billion? Anybody? Ferris Bueller? It depends. I grew up in Argentina. In Argentina, $1 billion is actually $1 million. So when I collect my $1 billion, I'm going to go to Argentina and cash it there because it's worth a lot more. It's worth $1 trillion in the US and in Europe. So just having that basic understanding, a simple question, how much is $1 billion? We're talking totally different languages depending on what country you're in. Another example, Goldilocks. The porridge is 160 degrees. Is it too cold, too hot, or just right? How many say too cold? Too hot? Just right? Exactly. It depends on the metadata. If it's Kelvin, it's frozen. If it's Celsius, and if it's Fahrenheit, it's just right. And this is the challenge that we face as an industry. We don't have the metadata. We think that, as we were talking about earlier, just saying, hey, I know the unit of measure, and therefore I have all the data that I need, or I know who recorded it, where they recorded it, and when. That's not enough. You need to understand the entire context to know what metadata you actually need. And the challenge is, if you're Neo, you can read this. But I'm not Neo from the Matrix, so I don't know what that is. And the challenge is, whose data is it anyway? Back to the problem we were talking about. It's R&D's data, it's regulatory's data, it's PD's data, it's manufacturing's data, it's sports market. No, the data belongs to the product. It's the product's data. Where the data resides, and data sovereignty is a huge challenge, because you need to have one system of record for that data set, not duplicate it across multiple systems and do swivel chair integration where you look at this system and then you turn and you enter into that system. And now you have duplicate data. And then you have data integrity issues. Go figure, we duplicate data or triplicate or quadruplicate, and then we wonder, why do we have data integrity issues? Because we're not managing our data. So master data management and governance are the foundation for digital transformation and data integrity. If you don't manage your data, any systems you build on top of that are going to crumble. And that's why it's so important to address upfront and to understand upfront master data management. I'll give you another example. You're in receiving, and you get a 55-gallon drum of 10% sodium chloride solution. You receive it into your system as an each, because I got one drum. When I use it in the lab, I use milliliters. So what's the conversion factor between each and milliliters? And this is where many projects fall down, because most MES systems, for example, let you do 2 units of measure, a primary and a secondary. Most ERPs let you do 2 units of measure, a primary and a secondary. There are 208,000 milliliters in a 55-gallon drum, if you do the math. So we need to think holistically rather than, yeah, the receiving person is going to have an easy job saying 1, but then we're not going to be able to use it. So how do we make this happen? And this is just a simple example of data integrity and master data management. So the opportunity is to weave all these digital threads that we have from all these systems into a data fabric. But the data fabric is not enough. What you need is a digital fabric that gives you that visibility across the entire product lifecycle, so that all the people that have the appropriate security can access that information and ultimately make decisions based on information and insights rather than simply on data. So these days, you can't do a presentation without talking about AI. If you're an analyst, you have to say AI at least 5 times. But I'm sorry, AI is not a strategy, it's a tool. Just like a hammer, just like the calculator, just like that TI-30, that's my actual TI-30 scientific calculator. I like to keep old stuff. I still have my Toshiba satellite with a green screen. It is a tool, just like spreadsheets. It's a tool. You don't say, my strategy is spreadsheets. Let me rephrase that. Unfortunately, many companies decided that their strategy was spreadsheets. And today, we run our businesses on spreadsheets. But that's not a strategy. It's a tool. And when all the tools you have are hammers, then everything looks like a nail. And when the only tool you have is spreadsheets, then everything looks like a spreadsheet, a pivot table. How can we create another pivot table to get the answer? No, we don't need a pivot table. Let's get the answer. And it's not just me saying it. Farhad Khan, who's the director of IT operations and delivery at FDA, said, AI is the contemporary calculator. So many of us are coming up with the same ideas and the same thoughts, or at least those of us who are looking ahead and saying, technology is an enabler. AI is going to be a feature. Do you have a spell checker on your word processor? Yeah. When you started with Word, or Works when it first started, or Wang, if you go that far back, it didn't have spell checkers. Now it's a feature. Everybody has it. It's table stakes. So the intent is, it's actually a collaboration, right? AI can do certain things, can process through some data much more quickly than humans can. Your Excel spreadsheet or whatever spreadsheet you use can sum up those numbers a lot more quickly than you can, even with a calculator. And we should leverage AI where appropriate in order to get the most benefit. But ultimately, a human needs to make that final decision. Another key challenge we have as an industry is the fact that we don't have all the right people at the table when we're making decisions. Oh, you need to have strategic sourcing, and you need to have quality because there's a quality decision, and you need to have your IT folks, and you need to have manufacturing, and you need... Are these the right people? Do they have the appropriate level of literacy to address the problem? Or do they just have the right chevron in their title? Do the decision makers understand what the problem is, or do they just see a nice PowerPoint? Are they buying because it's the next shiny object, because it says AI in it? Or do they understand what the challenge is and what the ultimate objective is? How is this going to help me improve patient outcomes? That's the question we always need to be asking ourselves. So let's shift a little bit and talk about the regulators, because, they're our enemies. They're the big bad wolf. Traditionally, that's been the role of regulators. They come in and they find things that are wrong with you, and they write you up. And everybody's afraid of the big bad wolf. They're going to come in and eat me. So I actually had a conversation, this goes back 5 years ago, with Rear Admiral Sean Boyd, who's the director of the Office of Regulatory Programs at the FDA, and both Sean and I are dog people. And I told him, Sean, the role of FDA, that's my dog Bella, the role of FDA is a sheep herding dog, not a big bad wolf. The intent of FDA is not to demise the industry. The intent of FDA is to keep an eye on the industry and make sure that we're doing the right things. So when I take, she's a little older now, but when I used to take Bella sheep herding, she's 12 now. When she was younger, she instinctively knew, she had no training on sheep herding. She instinctively knew how to keep an eye on the herd. So she's a 27-pound dog herding 125-pound sheep. As long as they're doing what they're supposed to do, she doesn't mind. She doesn't bother. She just follows behind. And she instinctively knows the matriarch, the leader of the pack, it's usually the matriarch, she's the one that everybody else follows. And then you have the middle of the pack, and then you always have some of the troublemakers. So when the troublemakers are making trouble, she sprints into action. And then she escalates, right? Just like the FDA does. You get a bark, that's your 43. You get a nip, that's your warning letter. And you get a bite, and that's your consent decree. The agency doesn't have unlimited resources. So the agency is also looking to focus resources where they're most needed. And the agency's role is to keep an eye on us as an industry. And as long as we keep moving forward, they're not going to bother us. And by the way, now with quality metrics initiatives and quality maturity and the FDA reestablishing or issuing guidance on remote regulatory assessments, they're going to start asking more and more for our data. I don't want to come to your facility. Why do I have to travel? That FDA reserved for FDA spot in front of your parking lot, you don't need it anymore. Because now they're asking for all this data electronically, and they're going to feed it into their AI and identify, grade you on a curve, and figure out, are you the matriarch leading the pack? I don't have to bother you. Are you in the middle of the pack? I'll just ask for a little more information. If you're an outlier, then get 5 FDA reserve spots. Because they will know before you know. And the other thing is, from a globalization and harmonization standpoint, we're seeing through ICH guidelines that are enabling us or facilitating compliance around the world. Because the reality was, historically, it was very challenging. FDA wants this, and Visa wants that, and JPMA wants that. Harmonization. They see the value. Regulators are seeing the value. And they're also putting regulatory frameworks that actually drive manufacturing innovation. They're saying, come to us. You have a new technology you want to use, you have a new approach you want to use, come to us. Explain it to us. Perfect example is continuous manufacturing. There are 6 products, 6, in the US that are approved that use some kind of continuous manufacturing. Why? Because as an industry, we're too afraid. Now, the person who is responsible for continuous manufacturing at FDA actually came from ExxonMobil. Who understands better? He didn't come from industry. He came from ExxonMobil. Who understands continuous manufacture better than somebody who came from the petrochemical industry? Cisco Vicente, who's running the Case for Quality initiative as well as CSA, came from IBM, microchip manufacturing, where quality means something totally different. So the agency is bringing people who understand. The other thing the agency is doing is they're digitally transforming themselves. And if you were here last year, you saw some of this content. But the agency is modernizing. And as part of their digital transformation initiative, moving to the cloud is at the top of the line. It's about creating shared ecosystem at the agency so that you can leverage technology, strengthening IT infrastructures, shared data and mission outcomes, and leveraging AI. Those are some of the goals that the agency has before, and you can look it up on their budget, 2024 to 2027. Vid Desai wrote a really nice intro. You can see the whole perspective. So what is driving all this regulatory confusion in our industry? Is it the regulators? Or are we doing it to ourselves? So let me ask you, which one of these 2 signatures are compliant? Who says the one in black ink? Raise your hand. Who says the one in blue ink? They're both compliant. There is no statutory requirement that dictates or requires a color ink. It says it needs to be indelible, permanent, and legible. Those are the 3 requirements. If you like hot pink it is. You like purple, fuchsia, any color you want. The challenge is, and I've had these discussions with VP of qualities at very large companies, and they'll tell me, yes, but the auditor wrote me up because I wrote it in the wrong color. Yes, they wrote you up because your SOP states that you must sign in blue ink or black ink. So they wrote you up because you violated your SOPs, not because it's in the predicate rule. So change your SOP. Oh, no, but we can't change our SOP. Why not? Why not? By the way, this comes from copiers. When copiers first came into the workplace, they couldn't pick up blue ink, and some companies wanted to know original from copy, and some companies wanted to have a complete copy, and that's how it came about. How many of you still use fax machines with thermal paper? Right? Same scenario. The challenge is we're still validating like it's 1999. How many of you have a BlackBerry? How many of you have that Nokia 3200 that went doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo? We all know the ringtone, if you're old enough. That's the technology that was available in 1999 when Al Taylor and John Murray at the FDA wrote the guidance for computer system validation. Now, if you read that guidance, it's still applicable today. But the problem is, as an industry, we tie our own two hands behind our back and say, these are all the documentation that we need to create in order to validate a system, instead of saying, what is it that we need to do in order to prove that it meets our intended use? The focus for CSA, actually, we were in a webinar with AstraZeneca last week, and Bob from AstraZeneca said, CSA stands for a common sense approach. It's about common sense. What documentation do you need? Don't write documentation for the auditors. Write documentation that adds value to your business. If it doesn't add value, don't write it. Don't create it. Challenge. So what we need to overcome is our internal regulatory inertia. It's not easy, I know. But we need to go to our friends in quality, because that's where regulatory actually lives in most organizations. According to our research, 83% of respondents told us that the role of quality at their organization is either ensuring compliance with regulatory requirements or internal SOPs. That's not the role of quality in any other industry. The role of quality in every other industry is to minimize error so you can improve profit. Work for Toyota, quality, less issues, make it up on volume. In our industry, the focus of the focus of quality tends to be regulatory. And as a result, it's very challenging to go to many of our quality folks, or our folks who live in the quality department in the chevron called quality, and say you need to change things. Because change means risk. The easiest answer, or the safest answer for somebody in the quality department, is often no. Because I'm not making a decision, somebody else made the decision. And I love my friends in quality. Go to your friends in quality with a solution, not with a problem. With the understanding of how it complies with regulatory requirements. So buzzword bingo. If I were to ask the CEOs at your companies, what is the rate of adoption for digital twins and IoT and AI and ERP and PLM and even quantum computing? I would hear the rate of adoption is 100%. Are you doing IoT? Yes. Are you doing digital tech transfer? Yes. Are you using quantum computing? Yes. Are you using modeling and simulation? Yes. Where? In this very, very narrow pilot that we run, we were using quantum computing. We work with Honeywell, and we leveraged their quantum computer, or Google, or IBM, and we came up with some new chemical entities, and it was awesome. What are you doing with it now? Oh, I don't know. So the rate of adoption is 100%, but it depends on who you ask. The challenge is we need to change the culture, right? And as Peter Drucker said, culture, it's strategy for breakfast. You can have the best strategy in the world. If your culture doesn't align with the expectations, then it's all for naught. So we all need to become change agents. Don't take no for an answer if you know you're right. Work with your quality folks, work with your PD folks, work with your post-market surveillance folks, manufacturing, across the entire product life cycle. How can we improve patient outcomes? And move those catapults around and aim them to break down those fortresses rather than throwing data over the wall. The intent is, how can we collaboratively work together? And we can. And we must, because our industry is changing. Final thoughts. I'm a minute late. So a couple of final thoughts. Focus on improving patient outcomes. That is the goal. Don't focus only on your chevron. Use your chevron to say, how can I improve patient outcomes? My chevron is the how am I going to do it? The why is because we all want to improve patient outcomes, because at some point, all of us either have been or will be patients. We need to accelerate time to market. And we need to have efficiencies in order to address the price pressures. We are going to need to become a lot more efficient. We need to solve tomorrow's problems, not just yesterday's problems. We need to collaborate and cooperate across the entire product lifecycle. In order to do that, we need to have visibility across the entire product lifecycle. As I said, one size does not fit all. Find the right partner ecosystem that will enable you, through their technology, to drive improved patient outcomes. Master data management and governance, it's the foundation. Start with that yesterday. You need to overcome that internal regulatory inertia in order to drive agility. Now, the folks in those departments don't mean it. They don't mean to hold you up. The challenge is that very often we hear about critical thinking, and that's confused with thinking critically. Critical thinking is, how can I do things better? How can I find a better way to do this? Thinking critically is, no, that won't work. No, that won't work. No, that's too much risk. Let's work together. Let's enable. And then leverage AI as a tool. It's a tool. If somebody comes to you and says, our strategy is to use AI, here's a hammer. Ultimately, we need to accelerate time to market from a business standpoint. But finally, we need to think about the patient. And just like it takes a village to raise a child, it does take an ecosystem to improve patient outcomes. And the reason we need that is the business dynamics are compelling us to change. The technology is ready, and the regulators are encouraging us to do that. So with that, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed today's presentation, and if you want to contact me, feel free to do that. I'll be around for the next couple of days so we can have a side conversation. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it.